We like to start every morning with something that we fondly refer to as the jargon of the day. This is when we take on one word, one phrase, one acronym. We try to make sense of it. First, we give you an actual definition, which we make fun of, and then we give you a working definition, which really kind of takes it down. Sometimes we have to take it down even another notch to try to get a handle on what is it we're talking about so that we can start to use these terms. But after all these years, I see that the parents, you guys have done such a great job of learning these terms. So today's term, it's an oldie but a goodie. We've done it before. There it is. It's mastery. What is mastery? And this is one of those confusing ones where I think we all feel like we know what mastery is, but what are we talking about with mastery when we're talking about autism and we're talking about ABA therapy? That's when it gets confusing. So let's take a look at our actual definition. Mastery is the point at which a child is said to have successfully acquired the target behavior determined by previously established criteria. That's the easiest. Is that really the hard one? Because that's the easiest definition I've seen before, because there are hard ones for mastery. But let's take a look at the working definition and then really take this apart. Mastery is when the child is independently demonstrating the desired skill at the desired level. The hard part about mastery is, I want to straighten out my skills sign, because if you're using skills, you're going to constantly be wanting to know when is a skill mastered. So I always like to think of My Fair Lady, because you know at the point when they're trying to teach her how to talk, and then somebody says, I don't know whether it's Professor Higgins or the other guy, says, by George, I think she's got it. That's what we're calling mastery. It isn't always that she has it, by the way. I think it's really important, that think in there. I think she has it. So before we go to teach a skill, there's a couple of things. First we identify what skill we want the individual to learn. And let's say that, let's compare to. So let's say we're going to teach toilet training, and we're going to just focus on urinating in the toilet. And then we have another skill that we want to teach, which is how to safely cross the street. Because these two things could very easily be on one person's agenda of things that we're trying to teach them. In both cases, with both lessons, there's two things that we want to determine before we even start to teach them. I mean, first of all, we want to know how much do they already know, right? Get a baseline. But in addition to that, we want to decide what we consider mastery to be before we start to teach it. And we want to figure out how we're going to plan for generalization. Ooh, right? Other jargon terms. But let's focus on the mastery here right now. So if I'm going to teach toilet training, what's mastery going to look like? Am I going to say that it's not mastered until they never have an accident? Well, I think kids continue sometimes to have little accidents, but we're not going to count if they have an occasional accident. We're not going to go back to zero and go, oh, they're not toilet trained, right? I know lots of kids that we consider toilet trained, but then whoopsie, they have a little accident. But how often would you consider it? How often does the accident have to happen before you consider them mastered at it? For some kids and for some people, it might be once a month. If once a month they have an accident, we consider that mastered, right? For other kids, we're going to be much more stringent with it and say we don't want them to have an accident, within a 24-hour period, and that we'll still call that mastered, right? And when something is mastered, it doesn't mean that we leave it alone. We continue to work on it, but not as heavily. It's not heavily in rotation for a skill. So you decide, okay, once the child is, and mastery takes place over several different things. They have to be able to do it with different people, and they have to be able to do it in different locations, because that's where we're getting to the generalization, right? So we might determine mastery is that they can do it in across 2 days for toilet training, let's say, and that a lot of times mastery, the sort of default is 80% of the time. If 80% of the time they're able to go to the bathroom, then, we're going to call that mastery, because we're not looking for perfection in the beginning necessarily. But how about if we're looking at crossing the street? Can we say, oh, it's going to be okay for us if they can do it 80% of the time? No. No. It's got to be 100% of the time. So, and until a child can cross the street 100% of the time and put in motion that they look both ways and do it safely, then we're not going to consider it mastered. Now, a lot of times a team will get together, and usually it's the BCBA who's deciding what the mastery criteria is. But a lot of times they'll say, okay, we're going to say that it's that they can do it 80% of the time so that would be 8 out of 10 trials, and they can do it across 2 or 3 sessions. Then if they can, then that means that if there's 10 trials, that in 8 of the 10 trials, the child can do it. And if they can do it during the morning session, the afternoon session, and they do it again in the morning and the afternoon session, boom, 8 out of 10 trials, we're going to put that in the mastery file. Okay, but some kids are sneaky. Right? Because let's say that they don't get it right. If we look at their graph and they didn't get the first one right of the 10 trials, and they didn't get the second one right, but all the ones after that they got right, it's still 80%, but we were refreshing their memory because they didn't get it right on the first one, so we said try again. They didn't get it right on the second one, we said try again, and then it's like, oh yeah, now I remember what it was they were teaching me. But they got consistently morning, and afternoon, they got the first 2 wrong. So at sometimes you set the mastery criteria and then go, oh yeah, no, it's not really working. And so you change the mastery criteria. So I just want you to realize that mastery criteria, you got to plan for it, you decide what it is beforehand, but then you have to be flexible with it afterwards. Because we really want to get to the point where we say, by George, I think she's got it. And sometimes later on, we go, nope, don't have it. We go back, change the mastery criteria, and then go on from there. But it's a really important distinction because we will keep something heavily in a rotation because when we're trying to learn something and get to mastery, one of the most important things we need to do is give plenty of learning opportunities. Once it gets to mastery, we want to leave room for something else. So we put this on a different kind of rotation and say, we're going to do this maybe, once a day instead of 4 times a day. Right? So mastery is important. Just remember, decide it beforehand, but then check to make sure that it's actually an efficient measuring stick for whether or not they really got it. Okay. Mastery is slippery. It's a slippery little fellow, but it's important.